Bruh, feel to be under your feet, the floor's on fire. Say Drake. Let's talk horror noir. That's right, folks. It's Black History Month, and I, among many things, am a black. Now, that being said, allow me to put out this disclaimer that just because I am a black person doesn't mean that I am the foremost expert on all things black. If we're being totally honest, I'm just barely an expert in anything. But that being said, I do like to talk about my special interests, and it just so happens that horror noir combines two of my special interests in one. So, okay, first things first. What is horror noir? Now, if you don't know, and you're just kind of guessing off of the context clues so far, you probably would say that horror noir is any movie that had black people in it. And to that, I say, nice try. I mean, you're technically correct in that black people do have to be in the horror movie to be considered a horror noir film, but if that was all it was, then like we would have to include like 7 of the Friday the 13th and maybe half of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. And while I do love those movies, that's not really the spirit of why this subgenre exists. Horror noir movies are movies that are made for the culture, specifically black culture. Now, if you're taking that to mean that those outside of the black community cannot watch or enjoy them, that's not what I'm saying at all. I mean, I realize that when people in the black community say, hey, we made this thing to reflect our experiences, a lot of people outside the community hear that and think, oh, that thing isn't for me. But that is not what it means. And really, that being said, if you think that a movie directed, written, or starring black people is automatically not for you, or something you would not be interested in, allow me to attempt to change your mind, or at least give you more information about horror noir as a genre. I mean, the fact of the matter is, just as black history is American history, film history is film history is film history. And as Jordan Peele pointed out in Nope, we've been here the whole time. Now, as per usual, I'm not going to get too deep into the history of horror noir, mostly because I am just an armchair historian. Okay, there are people more qualified that could give you a better picture. But I am going to talk a little bit about its evolution and the way it mirrors parts of our society, because it's horror, and the great thing about horror is that it is a mirror for our society, an unflinching mirror for our society. And like, because it's unflinching, it sometimes shows us things that we don't want to see but probably should see. Okay, so let's get it. The history of horror noir. Black cinema in general started during the silent era, like every movie that has ever existed. But as you can imagine, there were not a whole lot of roles for black actors. But as you can imagine, there were not a whole lot of roles for black actors that weren't background characters or servants or characters whose sole purpose is to help the white protagonist. Now, that changed a little bit as movies, became more narrative, because then you had the advent of vaudeville, and you had more black actors that were willing to take bigger roles to play the fool, as it were. But still, the whole phenomenon of movies made for black people weren't really a mainstream thing. They existed, but they weren't mainstream. Like, two of the earliest films that I am aware of that had all black casts were The Knights of Vaudeville in 1915 and The Homesteader in 1919. Like, they existed, they weren't mainstream. Now, if we are talking about horror specifically, again, black folks were there, but either as the servant or the fool or the character that is helping the white protagonist. And then in 1940, Son of Anagi happened. Son of Anagi was written by Black actor Spencer Williams, and it featured an all-Black cast. It is widely considered to be the first all-Black horror movie in existence. But essentially, Son of Anagi is where horror noir begins in earnest. Now, Spencer would follow that one up with 1941's The Blood of Jesus. And that movie turned out to be wildly successful. I just said that movie was wildly successful, and I'm willing to bet that a lot of you that are film buffs like me have probably never heard of it. Why have you never heard of a wildly successful horror movie from the 40s? Well, there is a reason for that. And the reason for that, especially if you are outside of the Black community and you think that horror noir is not for you, the reasoning is quite simply because that was by design. Okay, so back in the day, all media that was produced by and for Black folks was called race insert media here. For example, certain blues and folk artists like Muddy Waters, for example, the stuff that they played was considered race music. And so goes the way with films. Films that had mostly or all Black casts were considered race film. I mean, it is what it is. That's how we were labeled. And as with everything that Black people have been given in America, we took that particular lemon and we turned it into lemonade and made movies that reflected our experiences. Something we still do today. But see, here's the thing. When Hollywood started labeling these movies as race films, they weren't doing it as a means to categorize it, or at least not just as a means to categorize it. They were doing it as a way to let a mostly racist country know that these movies have Black people in them and therefore are not for you. And you know something, that actually is the messed up thing about racism, is that it is systemic in that way that it can be living in your house and you don't even know it. Like you don't even realize how deep it is until one day you're sitting around and you ask yourself, hey, how come I've never watched a movie with more than 3 Black people in it? Like, why have I never sought that out? Is it really because somebody told my great-great-grandfather that Black people were bad? Yes. Yes, that is it exactly. But honestly, that is not for me to unpack. Let's move on. The point that I'm getting at is something that I've always said, and that's that horror is E for everybody. And of all the things that you could be intimidated by in a horror movie, Black people should really not be one of them. So with that in mind, let's talk about some classic horror noir films that are on my personal list. Number 1 on the list is 1973's Ganja and Hess. So if you come across any horror noir list on the internet and it does not have this movie, don't trust it. It's full of crap. Do not trust the rest of the list. If Ganja and Hess is not on this list, don't trust it. Because anybody who knows anything about horror noir will cite Ganja and Hess. So like, this movie has got to be one of the founding bricks of gauzy vampire art house films. Like, I would put it right up there with The Hunger and The Blood of Dracula with Udo Kier. And you know, like The Hunger and The Blood of Dracula, it's not a conventional vampire film by any stretch of the imagination. Neither in its story or the vampire lore. It really is the kind of movie that you end up having to analyze, like a Kendrick song. It's a great movie if you're in a film class and you need a movie to analyze for class to write an essay on. Perfect movie. There's like so much symbolism about life and death and the origin of your soul and the meaning of all that within your ancestry and all of it. And it's told through the lens of the upper echelon of Black academia. It's a brilliant movie. Like and it doesn't fail to give you chills at certain junctures either. It's one of the best movies that I think I've ever seen. And side note, Spike Lee did a remake of it called In the Blood of Jesus, which I would say is moderately good. I don't know. Something was lost for me in the translation. You know what I'm saying? It's like In the Blood of Jesus and Ganja and Hess are two recipes for cornbread, and Spike Lee just substituted sugar for salt in his. It's still technically cornbread, but movie number 2 on my list is Candyman. And I mean the 1992 version, the original, and the 2021 version. The sequels after 1992, we're not counting those. That's honestly, that's like a whole other subject for another day. Now, this is a horror noir movie that I feel like people even outside the Black community know about and probably have watched and enjoyed. But the reason why I think it counts as horror noir is its impact on the Black community. See, the thing about Candyman is that we get it as Black folks. Most Black folks, Candyman, we get. See, a weird thing was happening in the 80s and 90s with horror movies within the Black community. Most of them were eliciting more laughs than scares out of us. Now, I could probably sit here and cite a number of reasons as to why that is, but I think the main one is that there wasn't a lot to relate to in the average horror movie for Black folks. We really didn't see ourselves in it. If we did, we were usually the first ones to die, or we were the best friend of the white protagonist. We're basically the same roles from like back in the day. Okay, sans servants. There weren't a whole lot of servants, but we were bad guys. We were the first ones to go. We were the best friend. And what's really bad is that if we were the best friend, we were the sassy best friend of the white protagonist in a very suburban high school, which I'm sure there were Black kids who were the sassy best friend in an all-white high school in America, but it wasn't exactly a common experience. But see, both the original and the remake were set in spaces where most Black Americans have been at some point in their life. And to further that conclusion, the remake tackles being outside of those spaces and still having the ghosts of where we came from follow us. And the thing is, the movie isn't all about the message. It's legitimately scary. I mean, even today, I know hard hood guys that will not say Candyman 5 times in any kind of setting. Like using the vehicle of of urban legends to power the plot, genius. Genius. Because there's a lot of superstition within the Black community. Maybe not as much today as there was when I was growing up, but there were, okay? I had a grandmother who once told me not to use red lights in lamps because they invite evil spirits in a home. All that being said, the Candyman films are truly terrifying because they take part of the common experience of trauma that a lot of Black folks have and uses it to manifest a monster that would actually scare anyone. Movie number 3 on my list is 1974's Sugar Hill. So, okay, this one came about during the blaxploitation era. If you have no idea what that is, real quick, it was a point in time in 70s films where a bunch of filmmakers started making movies that surround the Black experience exclusively. And those movies like spanned all the genres. There were action, there were comedy, and there was plenty of horror as well. I would say that the blaxploitation era is a very important time in film history, if for no other reason than that it gave filmmakers who otherwise wouldn't have been able to put their movies out there a platform. Now, in the way of horror history, Sugar Hill, I would say, is one of the most important horror films to exist. And that is because of the plot device of how they use zombies. Okay, so prior to Sugar Hill, most horror movies that depicted zombies did so kind of at the behest of the filmmaker's imagination. Nobody was doing any research of any kind to make any kind of movie. Honestly, it was pre-Google. Way pre-Google. And fun fact, zombies in particular come from the voodoo religion. Like the whole concept of it comes from the religion of voodoo. And in that vein, they aren't like ambling, flesh-eating creatures. What they are, well, they're the dead that are being controlled by an evil spirit. Off the top of my head, like I know it was done maybe once before. I think White Zombie um, did it way back in the 30s. But really, the entire concept of zombies as we know them, um, were not connected in this way prior, at least not in any mainstream way, prior to Sugar Hill. And like in terms of scares, the movie is actually pretty creepy still to this day. I mean, if you know anything about voodoo in particular, like they actually depict Baron Samedi in this movie as well. Look him up, is all I'm gonna say. But outside of that too, Sugar Hill was also, because it was during the blaxploitation era, and the blaxploitation era was all about telling our stories. You know, so much of it is rooted in real life. That's the kind of thing that can terrify an audience, because it's all fine and good if the horror is someplace in England or in space or in some fantasy land, but when the story is taking place in a neighborhood that you know, or a neighborhood something like you're accustomed to, that might keep you up at night a little. And like horror noir encompasses a whole bunch of other movies. I mean, not just Jordan Peele's, Get Out, Us, and Nope. I'm talking Blackula. I'm talking Vamp with Grace Jones, which Vamp is one of my favorite vampire movies of all times. It is a vampire movie with Grace Jones in it. Let me say that again. It's a vampire movie with Grace Jones in it. And honey, if you don't know who Grace Jones is, I I would highly advise you educate yourself about her, because she was the one back in the day. But yeah, all these movies are wonderful films that really deserve more recognition than they've gotten. And if you'd like a bigger list, as it happens, I have curated one on Benable. The link is in the description. Also, too, there is a documentary that is actually called Horror Noire, that features famed horror writer and certified PhD in horror, Tananarive Due. That I also highly recommend, because it's honestly, as documentaries go, it's a great place to start if you want to know more about the genre. But in the end, I hope this video inspires you to add a few more horror noir films to your repertoire. And what a great time to do it. We're only halfway through the month, so get on it. Watch some of these movies. Expand your mind. Or as the great George Clinton once said, free your mind and your ass will follow. Once again, thank you for joining me through this video essay. I post one every couple of weeks, so make sure you subscribe so you get a notification of when a new one is out. Also, follow me on my other links, because I'm always doing something, and I'm always looking to do more things as well. Anyway, thanks for joining me. See you around. Bye.